from computer-brain interfaces to meditation headbands. Today we talk about everything from coming to a lab to a billion-dollar company. We talk about pathways to commercialization, how Neurotech ventures go from lab to market. Welcome to the ReeThink podcast, where neuroscience and technology converge to rewire minds, markets, and human potential. I'm your host, Rudi Adigbli, and I'm the founder of Rewire Ventures. And today we have really exciting things to discuss, in particular how we approach commercialization. Basically, in order to have an idea how we monetize a specific technology, we have to understand the market first. So what I wanted us to do is now that we have a look and a definition about the market. Because you might remember that sometimes I talk about neurotech, sometimes I just talk about tackling different things like mental health, cognitive decline, and productivity. For me, because it's a very heterogenic field, I think it's the best approach to see this market, because we have very different things that want to be achieved. However, the solution is very similar in a sense, from my perspective at least, but it's very heterogenic. And I will show you that in an example on how to define the market, because when we want to commercialize something, we need to understand who is going to buy it. And interesting enough, in this specific industry, we have a lot of different pathways. In order to get that, we need to drill it down and stop from the really high level top. So we can really look from the market from the observer position and then drill it down until we get into the juices and the business models. We probably will not discuss business model in detail. This is maybe something for another podcast. Nevertheless, let's dive into it. I will share my screen to show you about the markets that we have defined so far. So have a look. I will make this bigger so we have more to see here. So, okay. So this is how we basically defined the market. As you can see, the whole market is a composition of different sub-markets, which are basically each and every one growing, are either already very big, like behavioral therapy. That's already a really big market, which is not growing that fast, but is already big. Then we have digital health, which is a smaller market, but is one of the fastest growing market. 27.8%. is the growth rate here. Then we have mental wellness. This is really from my perspective, one of the most interesting and crucial markets in order to make this industry really big. And then we have the workplace market. We will look at this also from another perspective later. Keep that in mind. And if you pull that all together, you can see we end up with a market that is almost the size of 1 trillion. And this is by taking into account the growth rate. This is by 32. And interesting enough, this market is projected to be as big as the whole generative AI market. Nevertheless, something interesting just happened this year. The Harvard Business Review made a study that the number one use case for generative AI, maybe you guessed it, is now questions around mental health, which is interesting. So in a sense, the markets are fusing, but it's also a good, let's say, example of what I have discussed in the first episode, that AI is an enabler for what is coming into this industry. And I think this is one of the biggest indicator for that AI is becoming an enabler. On the other hand, it's also a good indicator that the market has reached the mainstream in a sense. So that is that. I wanted to show you. So as you can see here already, when you see the composition of the markets, you can already approach it from different angles. And then we have, for instance, well, that's something I wanted to show you. So, and as you can see, you can approach it from different perspectives. I have also another slide which I want to show you, or a picture, and this comes from the mental health in McKinsey Health Institute. And I think this is one of the best graphics I have seen so far, because it really drills down or bring home the whole idea of this is a very holistic market, and whenever you want to look for market opportunity, you have to approach it from convergence. Converging meaning like having an application and using with a different spin in order to introduce a new technology. Like what we can do now when we apply neuroscience with technology, now we can bring it into, for instance, we can bring it into how we approach UX design. And this is the converging. UX design is something that is already familiar. It's an established market or established field in a sense. But just imagine what you can do when you introduce neuroscience into UX design. There will be a totally new philosophy. But this is just an example. That's why what I wanted to bring home to make the combination of thinking in convergence. So now let's look at the graphic, which is, as I said, like one of the best graphics. And you can see how all these like different health factors are tied into mental health and neurological health. And how important, and this is one of the key things that we have defined, is you have to approach it whenever you are asking for who's going to pay for it. There are basically 3 different routes, or 4. More or less. We will discuss that in detail later, and who's going to pay it. And you can see the focus here is workplace performance. This is also something where I will show you something. And you see, when you approach workforce or workplace performance from a holistic approach, and you bring in convergence of neuroscience and technology, you can see now you have all the mental health factors, which ties into stress, sleep, community engagement, health risk factors, social support, physical activity, cognitive engagement, access to healthcare, mindset benefits. And then from what it leads to is for the employees, increased retention and attraction. I can show you graphs and data on that. Increased productivity, same. Increased innovation and creativity, reduced health care costs, and adaptability to capacity to learn. You can see when you bring that home and you show this a company, let's say a Fortune 500 company, when you tell them like invest into mental health and neurotech or brain health, everybody will say, why? It doesn't make sense. We create gadgets or whatever it is. It makes no sense. Nevertheless, these things are very important for workplace performance. So, and then on the other hand, we have neurological health. And as you can see, these also ties into the same things: stress, sleep, community engagement, etc., and also have a benefit or in an influence of the things in the employee. So that's why what I meant with, first of all, thinking from converging the technology or converging the fields, and also approach it from a holistic view. But this is not only a graphic, I can show you proof and data for this. That is important to show. So keep in mind what we have seen in the outcomes. So, I mean, we basically have an idea already. So this is the thing here. Big tech is already heavily investing in mental health. And what they have as an impact is, as you can see in the graphic before, productivity impact, 35% productivity increase, 15% lower turnover, and 25% decrease in not being around, and 20% improved employee satisfaction. this exactly proves the point in the graphic before. Same here. We have the impact, and you can see also how they improved the spending. They just improved the spending from 35 million to 110 million on mental health for their employees, so workplace wellness in a sense. And you can see also here 20% less people that are sick or not around, 30% lower. No, I'm not sure about that one, but not so important. And 15% faster task completion. So talking about productivity once again. And the outcome was also efficiency, 10% improvement in logistic operations. And here we have the same with Apple. Once again, 10% improvement in high pressure roles when it comes to productivity impact, 15% raise in engagement, and retention rate, also very important, 10% lower turnover in key departments. And as you can see, here once again, also investments grow from 50 million to 150 million for Google. And what they have an outcome, interesting. You see, Google employees are far more productive, or they were less productive. I doubt that, nevertheless. 30% performance boost in employees using mental health services, 20% drop in stress, and then also retention increased 12% turnover reduced over last 5 years. So as you can see here, this already shows you when you invest as a company talking about wellness, wellness tech or productivity, corporate wellness, workplace wellness, you can see when you invest in employees into mental health, then the outcome is more productivity, more happiness, and less turnover, so more retention. And it's interesting, right? And coming back to the next thing I wanted to show you to really bring that topic home is I found a great article talking about pathways commercialization. And the interesting thing is, first of all, we have to talk about there is a boom in neurotech companies funding since 2010. That's very interesting to note. And as you can see how much this is growing, this is from last year, the Neurotech funding snapshot. And as you can see, we have here in the top markets grow to 88%, almost 90% of growth rate in that field just recently. So coming back to this article. And here, that's a really important thing to notice, that we have more a focus on consumer than medical neurotech companies. And I think there's a reason. I will elaborate later what is the reason for that. And then we go further, then also interesting, you can see neurotech concentrates in mostly North America. And this coincides also with what we have seen when I remember where we identified startups. Most innovation comes from the US, nevertheless, and also UK, but the whole field is growing very fast. And as you can see here, 60% of all neurotech firms across the regions are consumer neurotech. And as you can see here, in America, it's 45, in Europa, it's almost 60, in Asia, it's over 60. So going further, and then what we have here as well is difference in funding sources. That's also something to note, that in Europe, there's more public funding and less venture capital and angel investors. In North America, there is more. The most majority comes from venture capital. I think that's also tied to, let's say, the mindset is different. Venture capital in North America is very much embedded into the startup ecosystem. One thing that is crucial is in North America, all the pension funds are also investing heavily into venture capital. Interesting enough, this model was used also for Switzerland. So we have new law that allows also pension funds to invest into venture capital, which is totally new. And I know also from inside information that a lot of pension funds are now looking into that, but it's a slow process. It might take us at least 10 years from now. That's my best educated guess until we can see the results. I think that's one of the crucial points why North America has such a vibrant startup ecosystem with a lot of possibilities to get funding. And I have to tell you, I can also tell you from a story of a advisor of mine who has launched a company in the field of mental health neurotech in Barcelona, and he could not find any European investments. So he looked for investors in North America, and there he go. He found people that invested in him, and nevertheless, he managed to have an exit. So that is that. And this shows us, once again, reiterate the topic that I have discussed in the first episode, that there is a particular funding gap in neurotech, in particular when it comes to after angel investing, meaning all the early stage investing after angel have invested before the growth stage. And this is also something that I could found in this article discussing this at length, that growth funding is not a topic, but seed funding, or more or less after angel investing have funded. But you can see also that this is not only an exclusive problem for this space, this industry that we are talking about. This is also a problem that is facing the whole startup ecosystem in general in Europe. Nevertheless, things are getting better. We have here taking the most consumer neurotech companies chose EEG. And later we'll discuss something particular about EEG in what it does. And interesting enough, thanks to AI, EEG got an upgrade in things that it's able to do. As I said, I believe it's an integral technology, and artificial intelligence. In this case, I'm referring to not only AI models, also machine learning. That's slightly different. And then we have also electrical stimulation, which is EMG, and we have also functional near-infrared spectroscopy. And two different technologies can, let's say, you can achieve similar outcomes. And I can show you an example for Neurotech, consumer neurotech, which is, as you can see, this is the Choose Muse number 4, and you wear it like this. And this is an EEG device, so it can measure your brain waves and interpret that signal and create meaning out of the understanding. And it has also, you can use it with biofeedback. Biofeedback, to reiterate, is basically you doing something, you meditate, for instance, and whenever your brain is in a certain brain wave, so that is associated with being relaxed, then you get a signal. And then you can remember, or then you learn, okay, this is how it feels to be relaxed. So the mind-body connection increases over time. And we have something similar. This is also working with biofeedback, but it's a different technology. It's not EEG. This is the Mandy device. It's also goes up like that, but this is using FNIRS. So it works with infrared, and what it measures blood flow in a specific area, here specifically in the frontal lobe. So that is that. And then, as you see, EEG dominates consumer tech. Then, interesting enough, it's also similar to what I mentioned before. They see it similar. Artificial intelligence is a strategic enabler in the consumer market. I would even argue not only in the consumer market, is probably what we can see at this point of time. I see it as well, in particular machine learning, for also the medical market. I've seen startups and discussed with startups and what they are doing in that sense. Very important here, signals from a growing neurotech ecosystem. So the whole market is growing. interesting enough, it has a typical signs of a sector in the growth stage. And that's exactly what I mentioned. So we have, on the one hand, we have not a lot of like investments in the early startup phases. As you can see here, seed and Series A. These are consumer versus medical. And that's also something, consumer have a easier time to get funding than medical. And then growth stage, Series B and C, they have no problem at all to get funding. It's more here, but these are the typical signs of a new industry in the rise, that heading to maturity. And the interesting thing, it's aligning to what we have seen in the beginning, that this is a market growing. And interesting enough, that you can see as well, we have here in the growth stage, we have almost the same number of medical companies and consumer companies. And that's interesting. That shows you more medical companies reaching that stage versus consumer companies. So slow lane, but fast track. This makes totally sense. We discussed it in detail why that is, that consumer neurotech reaches the market faster. It's just part of the process, but there's something more I wanted to show you. And this is also makes more sense, that consumer tech company tends to stay smaller, but it's also a structural feature rather than bug. Here, funding landscape and capital allocation patterns. That's very interesting. Consumer companies generate a similar revenue to medical ones with only a quarter of the funding. It makes totally sense. It makes 100% sense, because a lot of what costs are generating in the medical field are tied down to the regulated, to be regulated in a sense, going to the FDA pipeline, for instance. But we discuss that in a second. So, and then here, funding consumer neurotech skews toward firms with products on the market. Makes also totally sense, ties into an investor that is more, let's say, likes to hedge his bets in that sense. And then when they have a launch product, they can use it, they can test the user experience. And then it's also possible for the startup to showcase traction. Yeah, makes totally sense. And so I almost think that's very logical, because once again, in the medical funding, you have to go to a regulatory body, either in Europe or the like gold standard FDA in the US. And then in that sense, you are most of the time in the phase where you develop the product. And if you have to do a clinical trial, it's also something that at least goes on for a couple of years before you reach the market. And then when this medical device or intervention or drug is released, then of course funding will also come, but then the market valuation had a huge jump already, that the funding might dry down, and it's also only interesting for very, very large institutions writing very big checks. Yeah, and that's why it makes also sense that companies in the neurotech space raise around consumer tech companies raise around 1.125 million, but medical firms are most of the time exceeding that. That's something that we have seen also in biotech, and it's also interesting. I think biotech started around in the 90s, and we can see the same with neurotech. And in biotech, most of the time is you have something which might work in theory. There's a new scientific insight. Then you apply technology to it, and then you start with a concept, and then of course you have to develop that. And in order to reach the market, most of the time it's hundreds of millions that needs to be invested. And sometimes when you have to go to clinical trials, in particular, when you have a drug, it's so complicated. You have the clinical trials, phase 1, 2, 3. And interesting enough, if you fail, for instance, phase 2, then you have to go to phase 1 once again and start over. And that's a very costly process to be in. And later I will show you how the companies and my research and also from my experience tackle this, and what are the benefits. And that's a very important signal. And I will come to that as well, that you see a lot of like interesting in consumer tech companies like Meta, Apple, Google, Samsung, Amazon, Nvidia, and also Jeff Bezos. And these things, keep that in mind because they are really crucial to find, let's say, the buyer for your devices, for your software, or whatever you will bring to the market. Yeah. Okay, that is that. Really great article. I will link it in the description. If you want to have more information, if you want to dive deep into this article and the data, I recommend you to do that. But we just keep things, we take the things away and to further this discussion. I will stop sharing now to show you the different routes one can go. So, and as you can see, what we have seen now, we have like three pathways. Either we have the more classical, it's a medical device, it's a medical intervention. Therefore, you have to go to the regulated route, which means you either go to the gold standard, which is the FDA road, which is very complicated when it's a medical device, and you have three categories. So the difference is when you have a device versus drug approval. Exactly here you have the classes. Here are no classes because you have to go to the clinical trials. With clinical trials, you have patients involved, and in particular after the clinical or in phase 3, we're talking about maybe a couple of 100,000 people testing this new specific drug. The difference with device approval is that we have different classes, and classes are determined by how much there is an impact or risk to the patient using that device. And if the risk is low, it's a smaller process, but if it's a high impact, then we talking about similar to something that is a clinical trial, what we have also in the drug phase. The only difference is the amount of people that are used for these clinical trials. So we're talking not about maybe 100,000 of patients that use this device. We're talking about maybe a couple of thousands. And this is really difficult to achieve. And that's also one additional point why there is like different routes to go, even with people that might have a medical application as something to achieve later stage, but now they are in the consumer stage. But I will discuss this in detail now because I wanted to really show you the difference here. So as I said, like we have the medical pathway, the classical, which starts with research. Then we have for the regulatory approval in the clinical trials. And then the good thing is, and this is where it comes to who's paying for that. When patients are paying for that, the great thing is it gets reimbursed by insurance, which is an interesting way to go. And there's one particular German company. They are already very big in the market, in particular when it comes to that you can do, like, for instance, therapy at home using online methods, and it's totally reimbursed by insurance. Yeah. So the German company that does it is Hello Better. So everybody might know Hello Better because at some point they were making a lot of YouTube commercials. So when you are on YouTube, you might have seen their advertisements. And as I said, like they have managed to get the reimbursement from the insurance. So you, let's say, patient, you can use it, you can apply for it. There's a process in place whenever you're paying for that you get reimbursed. So, and that's a very interesting, let's say, and a very profitable way to do that. But it's the most complicated because you also are working together with a regulatory body, then also having a lot of regulations increase to the cost. It also increase on the headcount amount of people you might need to reach a market maturity, so you can really drop your product into market. If you have any problems in, for instance, the clinical trials or in the whole approval process, this can delay your go-to-market for years and years. And that's why it's from my perspective, high risk, high reward strategy, because at the end of the day, you might have a need for 100 millions of investment before there is $1 earned. Nevertheless, what we can see, and this is in biotech very common, is then you have these companies that had investments in the hundred of millions. They reached whatever they wanted to reach. They come out with something that is usable. And then all of a sudden, this company is worth a couple of billions. So, and then we have one of the most interesting examples or most known example is Neuralink. So there are now, for instance, they have already a patient where it was implemented their solution, and he was able to play Pong with his device. And funny enough, not funny, but interesting enough, they realized after implementing that, I think something around those lines, 80% of the wires that are in his skull are not properly working anymore. Nevertheless, he can use the interface still. And this is, as you can see, there's a lot of costs involved and also human costs if you try such a thing. But you can, when you are Googling this for instance, on YouTube, you find a lot of examples of people using Neuralink. I think there's a couple of different people, and one was blind. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I saw a story. I'm not sure whether this was Neuralink or something else, a precursor of Neuralink, but I might remember there was a person that was blind, could never see, and they able to manage to give him eyesight, which is really remarkable. And so then we have the other side, and as you might remember, the article we have seen, a lot of consumer tech. Once again, all these different and funny devices, they come from the consumer tech space. And the interesting thing here is there's, of course, a faster go-to-market. You have more freedom, and you have also seen in the article, it tends to be a product already in place when investors come on board. And this is also an easier way to showcase traction, meaning they have maybe already a customer base. For instance, Juice Moose is a company that have a lot of traction. It's known, a lot of customers, probably in the millions, or at least a couple of 100,000. So, but they are having millions in revenue already. Same goes with Mendy. And this is also something that can be a good example. And then now I can show you also something different. And there is a middle part of that. So imagine we have a company, and I can show you two examples. Two of these examples are already companies I'm in contact with, and I will have the founders in an interview coming in the next episode, so stay tuned for that. That will be exciting. And one company is Pulsetto and also Trip. I show these companies just briefly and give you an example of what they are doing and what is the difference. So that's also very important to mention. This is something I didn't mention before. Also the difference between when you have a medical device. So for instance, let's say Trip is a medical intervention. There's a difference also to what you can advertise. That's very interesting. And you have now, with some consumer products, you can have an overlap of treating symptoms, but are not able to advertise it. That's also a huge difference between being a consumer product, being a medical intervention, medical device. So, and what we have seen, talking to a lot of neurotech companies in that space, mental health companies in that space, is that we have seen now a hybrid model. So starting in the consumer space, bringing a product very fast to the market and having already resources, also insights. And there's also another very particular thing that coincides with the technology, which is machine learning and AI. And for machine learning and AI, you need a lot of data, really a lot of data to make it really work. And that's also something, small side story to note. And this is how remarkable the human mind is we as humans, we don't need a lot of data in order to do something. So a lot of things that what we are learning are transferable. I made the example of running, for instance. You can walk, and it's very easy for a human when he can walk that he learns to run. But for machines so far, or AI models, is you need a lot of data in order to do the one thing and the other thing. There is now a effort to create synthetic data, meaning data that is not like coming from real work, but is other created or generated, that will solve this problem. But this is still something where we as human have a huge advantage, because we don't need a lot of like training data on a specific skill in order to apply it to another thing. And this is also something that we see with geniuses. They are very good at having a skill and apply the essence or the things that are transferable to another field to dominate. And that's why we have also a lot of like people coming from different industry in reshaping the industry. For instance, the Wright brothers, they were cycle mechanics, and they managed to be the first to have a flying machine. But they were not like the ones that were, let's say, nobody thought they would be the one that will achieve that. Because first of all, they had the smallest funding, and they were like a totally different field. There were a lot of other people having institutional funding that everybody thought they will manage to be the first to have a flying machine. Nevertheless, what happened was that it was the Wright brothers, and their approach to fail very fast. In that sense, they were using a different method, which is more thinkering, trying to do things, gathering feedback, adapt it, and then bring it to market. So coming back again to the hybrid approach. So with Trip, what they are doing, as you can see, they're creating a virtual VR experience. So you have a VR headset like Oculus VR or PlayStation VR, and then you have this experience. And I can show you a picture when I was using that. Also, interesting side note: the founder is Naya. I think her name is Naya Reeves, and she's the cousin of the actor Keanu Reeves. And that was very funny. And she was talking about stories about Keanu Reeves. I show you in the pictures. I will show the pictures when I used experience. It was a fun experience, and also she's a character. So back to Trip. So as you can see, what they can say is like, yeah, it helps with stress, it helps with relaxation and improve focus, all these things. But what they cannot say is like that that it heals or help with PTSD, for instance. But what she described to me is they have now increasingly feedback from customers that with symptoms of PTSD telling on reporting that the experience of Trip helped them tremendously with coping with PTSD. So it might have an application with PTSD. And in a later stage of that company, they might consider to roll that out for patients. But in order to say we can treat PTSD, or this is a treatment for PTSD and this is how you use Trip in order to treat that, you have to be regulated in that sense. But now, as you can see, now the company has already traction. They have understanding of the UX, the UI. They have also the understanding of consumers. They have also the understanding of how to market it bring it to market. And now with that knowledge, and also possibly with the funding they have right now, so they have already revenue, they can use it in an easier and more, let's say, safe way to go to the regulatory road and now have an application there. Because now the risk for somebody like an investor is far less than before in the traditional sense, when you are like in the whole phase when they are developing a device or a drug or whatever you name it, that in these phases you end up with, in the worst case, with something that might never reach the market, and it's just spending millions and millions and millions of dollars. So, and I have one more example. It's also Pulsetto. Pulsetto is a device that stimulates the vagus nerve. At some point, I will have the founder of Pulsetto in the pod, and the vagus nerve is very important for our central nerve system and very important for mental health in particular. We will have the discussion at a later point of time. Just keep it in mind. But also here, the technology of this device is 30 years old. And it's now in application, and funny enough, they have like very famous consumers, so brand ambassadors. So for instance, they one is Cristiano Ronaldo and also Brian Johnson. Everybody knows our favorite Robert, Brian Johnson. So what they managed is quite remarkable in that sense. It's a small company. Peter Diamandis is also very known for his Singularity University, for instance, and also an author. He published a couple of books also together with Stephen Kotler. Stephen Kotler, by the way, is my favorite author. He was an influential figure to be interested in the whole field. So, and who we have else? That is that. And interesting enough, I know, for instance, that they are heavily selling this product, and it's great, but they are developing already a medical device that will be used in the medical field for trauma healing, when I remember correctly. And in particular for their investors, it's a great process because they found a way to monetize their R&D in a sense. They have traction. They can prove already that they are able to launch a product, handle customers, handle logistics, handle production, because they are building the device themselves. And now the only thing that they have to add to their company in order to have a medical product is being able to sustain all these regulations and also go to the regulatory body to bring it to market. And then, of course, they are talking now of a different way to be monetized. And that's interesting. So since we covered now Trip and Pulsetto and what their roadmap is and going to look like, we come to something even more exciting, and it's regarding the brain-computer interface. And let me share something with you which encapsulate very great the idea of where there might be a market or a buyer for your specific startups, and basically also where are current trends going on, technologies going on, and in the conversion of that can be something that be a possibility to monetize your venture, whatever it might be in that space. So as you can see, these are a graphic that we have created together in the team when we was thinking about how we can convey where the value is created or where the money is created. And the thing is, as you might remember, the article that we had seen before was around, on the one hand, we could see that there are like the huge consumer companies, just like Apple, Meta, and Google, in the race, buying certain companies in that field because of their brain-computer interface. And it's interesting, when you see the whole picture, you have two different races. You have, on the one hand, you have the brain-computer interface that is non-invasive, meaning it doesn't protrude or go into your skull. It's something that you can wear, just like these products, something you can put on your head, and then it's fine. You're good to go, so to say. And then you have the invasive brain-computer interfaces. So things like Neuralink, things like paradromics, for instance. And these are the things that are now everybody is heading to creating that. But interesting enough is what contributes in order to reach that. Because at the end of the day, we have on both sides, we have neuromodulation. Neuromodulation is a term that describes how you can interfere or modulate, change things about the way you are thinking, for instance, how your brain is wired, and you can change that. That's neuromodulation. One example is as well with Choose Muse headband. It's also a form of neuromodulation. I have this headband on, I meditate, it gives me feedback whenever I reach a certain brainwave, a certain state. It gives me feedback so I can improve on it. It's also a form of neuromodulation. A more invasive one, like Neuralink, is that it restores certain functions like eyesight or the interaction with a computer. Although you might not be able to move your body, but you will be able to interact with the computer or to speak again. All these things is also a form of neuromodulation. And if you look at that, when you look at the beneficial platform, so we have human performance and enhancement. That's also something that might be interesting for like athletes, or there's also the term of one specific company coined this term. It's called the corporate athletes. So C-suite executives, they are also in a way athletes, so they are wired to perform at a high level, including when you are in stress, and that's also a form of athleticism in a sense. So human performance enhancement, really big topic, in particular Silicon Valley's a lot of type A personalities are like that. And when you drill it down, then you have professional services, you have sports, you have consumer. Of course, the military is also interested in human performance enhancement. So for instance, if you are a pilot or even a drone pilot and you have a operation that is going on for maybe more than 18 hours or something, then you want to be sure that the person operating those things is still totally sharp. And for instance, World War II, certain drugs were used. I think also the Nazis used certain drugs in order to enhance performance. So that is that. That's why the militaries might be interested in it as well. And then we have a precision neuropsychology. That's something that's a totally new field that benefits, on the one hand, having like a, let's say, digital way of understanding how the brain works. For instance, scanning the brain, and then also like modulate whatever the brain has with like maybe substances and stuff like that, and be also a device. Then of course we have the pharma and medical devices. Then insurance might be also interested in certain aspects of what we create. So just imagine that your insurance understand basically on behalf of your behaviors and also the activities you do, how well you are in certain aspects of your mental health, and how mental health as a whole is also, for instance, contributing, and also how brain health is instrumental for health, or for instance, health span in particular, because you can clearly see how somebody that maybe has a problem with his motor cortex, so he's not able to move as well. This has also or an effect of the person's ability to stay healthy, because he's not able to move as he used to be with a normal functioning brain. So there's also something. And then we have behavior monitoring and modeling and forecasting. And that's also something you can see in insurance, but even maybe in financials, that whenever you have a better model of how the brain works, the better you can also model predictive behavior in let's say, aspects like marketing. Marketing is also where it has been used a long time. For instance, psychological profiling and stuff like that. And this now gets even more advanced with understanding certain functions in the brain. But funny enough, social media already is kind of using that and molding that in a sense. So there is already something going on. So they're using already the insights in a sense. Just seeing that modeling is 2 times in that. Then, of course, education. I can tease also something that we will have somebody that is a really high profile name. He's a leading researcher in the field of education and learning. And so can be very, very much interesting. So stay tuned for that. You won't miss that. So let's go also to the technology platforms. So we have training data, and that's also something I mentioned before, how crucial and how important it is in order to, on the one hand, having the AI or machine learning models, but it's crucial in order that they work out really great, is that you have enough data. And whenever you don't have the data, or the data is not, let's say, usable in a sense, because on the one hand you have, let's say, you have data of 10,000 athletes, but one was recorded with one device and the other with another device, and then you might have, like, you cannot compare the data because they are in some ways or forms incomplete. But if you have a way to normalize the data, and or even better, have a way to, for instance, create synthetic data, then you have an advantage. And it's a crucial technology for the whole space. Because as I said, like AI and machine learning, that's an enabler. That's why it's crucial that this needs to be figured out. And funny enough, just recently, I heard in the All In podcast that Grok is now in certain aspects better than ChatGPT. So they use certain tests to see, or benchmark tests to see how advanced their chatbot is. And in certain aspects, Grok has surpassed ChatGPT. And one of the reasons was that they were able to create synthetic data. So basically, the training data, they had a large set of training data, and they were not only relied on data that was created by humans or by somebody else. They could use training data based on synthetic data which they have generated, and that was one of the crucial steps why they were able to achieve that. Then we talked about like the infrastructure, models and languages, and then of course hardware is important. Semiconductors, wireless, battery extension. Battery is not that good at this point of time. And then what we have else? Then we have all, of course, software applications. But I won't go into details. More important is to keep in mind that we have these enabling technologies that are aligned with these current mega trends, like longevity, training data awareness technology, that it has a negative impact, especially the topics we have discussed in the first two episodes. Then also the cognitive decline, the productivity loss, the mental resilience. And then also on the one hand, we have the increased trust in AI and machine learning. Loneliness is also a mega trend that enables for the brain-computer interface in neuromodulation as a whole topic here. And the key insights are, we have on the one hand, like the invasive part, which is this area here, which is driven by, everybody know Neuralink, and then Paradromics, which are, funny enough, parts of the founder team of Paradromics are former scientists at Neuralink. And their major difference is Neuralink is, although it's a medical device, it's more geared towards consumer and what they are able to do. And Paradromics is more on the medical side. So they have also a different solution. They're using something, their device is more durable. Also what they use to connect with the brain. And interesting enough is what they are advertising, they are able to connect deeper with the brain in a sense. I think at some point it might be interesting to dive deeper into this topic, but nevertheless, that's the thing. And one thing why non-invasive at some point was like more advanced in that sense, or was the only way to really interact with the brain on a way that is reliable, was that with an EEG device, so this device, but this is like just a small consumer face, there are also like some EEG device which are, let's say, more advanced. You probably have seen these pictures with these, like, it's almost a helmet and you have all these different buttons on it. that produce into the skull in a sense, but not invasive. These are not good enough, or they cannot reach deep enough into the signals of the brain in order to be very reliable as a source of having a computer-brain interface. You need to be very deep entrenched into the signals of the brain in order to have a really clear signal, in order to, let's say, have the signal that you want to move something on your screen, for instance. But interesting enough, what happened is with machine learning and with AI, now EEG can be used to have a better signal and can be used as a computer-brain interface, which is very interesting. And I want to show you something in particular, which makes a really good case and which shows you also that there's not only Neuralink and Paradromics very close to reaching that. It's also Meta. And I had a chance to speak to somebody that was working at Meta at 23 at the Neuro Summit, and they showcased certain things they were doing. And they bought a company, I think their name was Control, and they implemented or integrated into the reality labs of Meta, and they are now predominantly working on this computer-brain interface. But what they are doing, or what they did showcase there, was like a device that was on your wristband and how you could control it. And the funny, interesting thing is also they used almost like the same methodology in that sense, or the same method, that they had signals which are not perfect, but they used AI and machine learning to amplify the signal and being very distinguishable. So just imagine that you just have a risk here, and it was so advanced that we able to really understand wherever what you are doing in that sense. So let's have a look what, for instance, Meta is now doing, and this will blow your mind. So we will look into that. So I think the intro is good enough.
This next breakthrough is a lot deeper, all the way down to the very tissue of our brains, where researchers have used AI to translate brain scans into text.
UT researchers have essentially created a device called a semantic decoder that can read a person's mind by converting brain activity into a string of text.
In May of 2023, at the University of Texas at Austin, a device was created that can turn a person's brain activity and thoughts into a conscious, understandable stream of text. The company Meta also recently did the same. But that's not all. Just last month, Meta also unveiled an AI system that can analyze a person's brainwaves and predict what that person is looking at. If that's not enough, they were able to do this in real time. Basically, the system was mind reading. Has a multi-billion-dollar social media conglomerate just created a telepathy device with the help of generative AI? On the one hand, this is a potential...
I mean, it's mind-blowing. I know this video is already 1 year old, and still, when I see that, it's mind-blowing. I will link the whole video in the description so you can see it on your own. I highly encourage you to see that. But just to summarize, so what Meta is able to do is reading basically your thoughts and hook it up with generative AI to display it. And in the pictures you can see somebody was thinking of a cat, and then generative AI hooked on your brain, saw it, and created the image of a cat. So this gives you the understanding now on how far these computer-brain interfaces are yet going, and why also, for instance, like consumer products, or let's say consumer-oriented companies just like Meta or Google are interested in that, because they can see that this is a different user interface that can be used going forward to interface or interact with their consumer. So, and I have also seen other products going in that direction, that you, for instance, have headphones that can be used in order to control something. And that's the reason why there is also this second race, like everybody's looking for the computer brain interface, and the non-invasive is also very much interested in how this can also be a route, how you as a company can see, okay, everybody is looking for that. So maybe there's a small part of the contribution that leads to the computer-brain interface and can be also a roadmap to further have success. And as I mentioned before, this company named Control was also acquired by Meta exactly for that reason. So this can be a very good route. We're coming to the end of this episode. I hope you could have enjoyed it and had some interesting takeaways. I briefly summarize what you should take away from this podcast is always start by identifying the real market, just what we did at the beginning, that we looked at the market and the alleys we can go, and the buyer, who's buying it. Is it a consumer? Is it a patient? Or is it maybe a clinic? And then, of course, it determines which route to go. Then also analyze which pathway fits your resources. We got into that the medical regulated route requires far more capital. On the one hand, we have seen also in the growth stage, or like the graduation rate from these kind of companies are in the higher percentile. However, consumer-oriented products or startups was funded more earlier, and of course they had an easier route to go to the market, and most of the time for the investors, on the other hand, they had already a product, which means most of the time they have also traction to which they can display, meaning the investor knows they are able to sell their product and their intervention to buyers, and they have found a buyer. Very important to understand. And then also understanding the convergence, how, for instance, brain-computer interface and related technology enables new opportunities and create downstream markets, as we have explored in the whole market slide overview, from hardware parts to digital services. Great. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the ReeThink podcast. Subscribe to the Reshape Circle, where it's a community for investors, for entrepreneurs, and also scientists, and everybody that is interested in that space to engage with each other, and where I share also thoughts and insights and go deeper in certain topics. So subscribe to that. It's totally free, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And next episode, I can tell you we will have our first guest, and it will be the founder of Virtual Leap, Amir. And I'm really much looking forward to that. It will be exciting, and it will be a new milestone for the podcast, our first guest. So stay tuned, enjoy your day, and we talk soon. Bye.